That's right. We're making some changes. We got a new song. We got a new graphic. If you noticed, I hope you noticed. I put like a solid 20 minutes, 30 minutes into that graphic. So you better have noticed. But we're making some changes. If you're just joining us, my name is Cody.
And my name is Kyle, and I noticed that you made some changes, Cody. So
thank you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate all the hard work that you do. Well, let's clue everyone in if they haven't figured out by seeing a different title, a different picture, a different song, a different intro. What's going on, Cody?
Yeah, hopefully no one just went, what is this podcast? I didn't subscribe to this, unfollow. But yeah,
that could very well happen.
That's sad. Maybe we should have given more warning, but regardless, we're making some changes. We're excited. We've got some new things going on. If this is your first episode and you don't know, we started a podcast in, was it July? Did we start?
August? I don't even remember. August, probably.
Summer 2021, we started a podcast called Pastors with Pour-Overs. We just wanted a kind of a platform where we could have conversations to help our listeners work out what they believe, and we used specialty coffee because we were baristas and then we weren't, and now we are, and we like coffee. We're using coffee as kind of a just a means to like create a niche to kind of make it fun and lighthearted. And I think really our heart in it, like the coffee was fun, but our heart was that we saw a lot of people, especially people in our generation, like millennials. Like I noticed it in a lot of like musicians who I used to listen to or like leaving the faith, and they're saying, you know, I was really confronted by this issue, and I'm like, how could we believe this? How could Christians believe this? Or like, how could a good God do this? And it just kind of revealed that like a general lack of understanding. Like there are things that I'm like, I actually don't know where you got that idea, or like actually that's a pretty like basic thing to answer. And we saw that a lot of people were, you know, they were going through doubts and deconstruction based on not having really explored or been taught, maybe not having a depth of what they understood, and it left people prone to doubts, prone to misleading teachings and those sorts of things. And that was really our heart going into podcasting. That was what motivated us, and it still is very much a driving passion of ours, I think.
Yeah, and we used the name was just clever. Pastors with Pour-Overs, like who doesn't love that? And so like coffee kind of became like it was coming out of this idea of like we would be at the cafe working together, making coffee, and then talking about these things ourselves. And it's like, oh, what if we recorded that? And so it was a very natural thing. And we'd, sit down with some coffee every week and talk about the coffee at first, a little bit of banter back and forth, and then get into what, kind of that driving passion that you're talking about with talking about our faith. We're still going to have coffee. I have mine. You have yours.
I got coffee.
We're not throwing that away. We're still going to have some lighthearted fun and banter at the beginning, just like we are right now, obviously.
So much fun.
But one of the things that we wanted to, I guess, really focus in on is, when it comes to the beginning of a podcast, some people probably skip it. You do you. That's fine. I don't care. But like we want to kind of expand that out. And if you're pastors with pour-overs and then you don't talk about coffee, then if anyone came for the coffee content, they're going to be sad and disappointed and everything. Mm-hmm. So just expanding on that sense, we want to do more stuff, maybe write more things. I don't know, do some cool merch or something, other video content. But also wanted to talk about kind of some wider topics outside of coffee. Things in Christian culture. we're both have very nerdy sides to us. So like nerd culture, pop culture, that kind of thing. And we kind of needed a name that kind of brought all of that together. And kind of really focused in on what we wanted to do with this podcast and kind of our vision for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we landed after a very long shared note with a lot of possible ideas, some of which I was really proud of. I still think 101 Huntley Street would have been great. But we landed on the name Sinners and Sufferers. And this is, it's a line we pulled from the book, Was It Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, which I just started reading it. You've read it before. And he's talking
greatest
about
book of all time.
Is it?
Probably. According to many people on Twitter last year, the greatest book ever written.
Except John MacArthur. John MacArthur hated it.
So, yeah. Well, anyways, it was a dude who works for him or something, but
it was crazy. But he speaks a lot about Jesus' disposition and his heart for sinners and sufferers, the way that he comes to these people, that he really loves people, how he brings he says my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And we've had a number of conversations, with each other in this last year, where if you followed with us, that we've had kind of a crazy ride. We were pastors, and then we were church planters, and then we were nothing, and now we're doing ministry in other ways, and kind of I still a lot of people call me pastor. We were nothing. I don't know.
I think it's funny.
A lot of people still call me pastor. I still act like a pastor and just kind of accidentally teach people. But we've kind of been through the ringer in some ways with the church, and we're talking ourselves about how we felt like some hurt and some burnout, and we could empathize. Like we were saying, we can understand how a lot of people would leave the church after going through burnout, after going through hurt. But personally, knowing God and loving him and having this rich relationship and understanding, we can't let go of that. We still hold firm to the reality that Jesus is Lord, that he is hope and salvation for the sinner and the sufferer. And we've also had a lot of conversations with you guys, with our listeners. And that's really what we're doing this for. Kyle and I can just talk without recording it too. But we've had conversations with people where you're saying that, you're tired of, when we talked about pastors aren't professionals. We had some people saying I'm so tired of the professionalization of church. We've been hurt by this. And we see that a lot of people out there are tired. A lot of people are burnt out. They're weary. They're sinners and sufferers. And you're just people seeking to know God, seeking to know truth, to have a real relationship. And we wanted to kind of speak, to have this conversation with you guys. So we started this Sinners and Sufferers to be a podcast for sinners and sufferers, having conversations about theology, about faith, about culture, for weary souls in need of grace.
Yeah, and with that being said, the topic we want to kind of kick this brand new journey off with is really about us being sinners, and even talking about why there is suffering in this world, why we do suffer, and that comes back to what we call the fall. At the very beginning of the Bible, the beginning of the story of the Bible, the story of the whole world, we have this incredible, in Genesis 1 and 2, this incredible description of God creating the world and making everything that we see today, and making humanity as kind of the pinnacle of his creation. But then right away in chapter 3, we have what we call the fall, where sin entered into the world, and we now have what we call a fallen world because of that. And we want to read from our favorite statement of faith, probably. Unless there's a better one out there. I think we can
that's
say
safe.
that.
We can call it that.
Yeah. Our favorite statement of faith here, the 1689, says this: although God created man upright and perfect and gave him a righteous law, which had been unto life, had kept, holy smokes, I am stumbling, and gave him a righteous law, which had been unto life, had he kept it, and threatened death upon the breach thereof. Yet he did not long abide in this honor, Satan using the subtlety of the serpent to subdue Eve, then by seducing Adam, who without any compulsion did willfully transgress the law of their creation and the command given to them, in eating the forbidden fruit, which God was pleased according to his wise and holy counsel to permit, having purposed to order it to his own glory.
Mm. That is a packed paragraph, but we are going to break it down. And it's basically walking through like the first part of Genesis. It's walking through the creation account. So you can, as we go through the paragraph, you'll see we're just going right through Genesis. But I think the first thing that stood out to me that I think is worth addressing is that it says God created man upright and perfect. He made us upright and perfect. He made us to be righteous, to be moral beings. Actually, we had in our Discord, somebody asked recently about, is it Romans 2:14-16? I don't know if you saw that, Kyle. And Paul is talking about how we have actually, even if we haven't read the Bible, we don't know the law, we have kind of this innate sense of what's right and wrong, because we were made to reflect God in a moral sense, to be righteous and holy. And I think the word perfect, it's unusual. Like, I get what it's saying, but we were imperfect. We're certainly imperfect now as a result of the fall, which we're getting to. But I'd say, like, when we talk about God being perfect, we also mean that he's unchangeable, whereas we clearly are not. Our state, our status as righteous and holy was unstable. Sin has since corrupted our nature, but I think we can see that we were made for something else, that we don't feel comfortable or at home in a world corrupted by sin, because we were made to be upright and perfect. We were made to exist in unity, in like close relationship and communion with God, not sinning. And that's why we have innate sense of shame. That's why we have an innate conscience that's like, hey, that's not right. That's not what you were made to do. That's not how you're made to act. And we see that just in the way we were made, that God makes good things. He made man, said he was good.
Yeah, well, and particularly what always sticks out to me in Genesis 1, it's in verse 26-31, and it says, God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them rule over all things. But he creates man and creates us in his image, but we're obviously not the same because we're created, which is what you're talking about with, we're changeable. We can change, which is very evident in a couple chapters here. But verse 31, the end of chapter 1 says, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and morning, the sixth day. And up to this point, he said, he creates the sun and the moon and the stars, and it was good. And he creates the animals of the water, and it was good. And he creates the lilies of the field or whatever, and it was good. But then when it comes to mankind, it was very good. This is something special that God creates, creating man in his image. Nothing else is created in his image. And so right off the bat, you see this very special relationship that we have with him. And yeah, that's what it's getting at, is like he made us in this upright, perfect way. But at the same time, we're not God. So we are changeable, and it becomes very evident very quickly that we can easily be drawn away from him. He then makes the first covenant with man, gives them a righteous law, a good law, where he says in Genesis 2, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. So he gives them basically the parameters to live in, right? He's created the world. One thing that shouldn't be lost in us is when you see the creation, is that he's creating it for mankind, really. Like it's a gift to us. It's something for us to be a part of. He's preparing this place for us. And then he puts us in there and he's like, okay, be fruitful, multiply, rule the earth, rule over the fish of the sea, all these things that I've created, have dominion over all of it. And he gives us this command, and he gives us then this rule, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat. If you follow that, you'll have life and you'll be in perfect communion and union with me. You'll walk with me. You'll but then the consequence of breaking it is death. You shall surely die. If you eat of this tree, you shall surely die.
Yeah. I think that's something that, when you read the text, you see it, and it's something that just in the last couple years, I really started to wrap my head around, that right from the beginning, God starts making covenants with his people, with the people he's created. And he lays out, like, this is what I want for you. This is how I designed you to live. And if you live in it, you're going to be blessed. It's going to be amazing. Like we see later in the covenant? I always get the terms confused because this one is a covenant of works. Anyways, later we see when he makes a covenant with Israel, he says it very plainly, like, if you obey, you will be blessed. If you disobey, you will be cursed. And here he says, one thing. So we have the law written on our hearts in the sense that, murder still would have been wrong in the garden. If Adam killed Eve, like, that's still wrong, because those are things that come from God's nature, from who he is. Those are things that are written on us. But then he gives this special command: don't eat of this tree or you'll die. If you just refrain from eating from a specific tree, life, blessing, all these amazing things, but if you eat it, you'll die. And kind of the next point that I think we need to address, because they ate it and then clearly didn't drop dead because they got removed from the garden. They went on to have children. We've said before, we take this very literally, so we believe that we are their offspring. And I think there's some people just talk about like how it's God showing mercy that he didn't kill them immediately, but I think there's also very much was on one hand like a spiritual death, that they were severed from communion, they were severed from the life that they should have had there, but also physically the concept of death was introduced to them. We weren't made mortal. We were made to not experience death, but to live in perpetual communion with God. And now this idea where our bodies are breaking down, that, real things can threaten us physically and spiritually. Like, we have to be on guard. We have to be concerned because our lives are fragile. Death has been introduced into the world as a result of the breaking of this first covenant.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. I don't know if I have anything to, like, any quote to back this up, I'll say. Mm. But what's interesting, what you see is we often focus on when Genesis gives us these genealogies, it says these like crazy numbers, like, and Adam lived 997 years and then he died, and Enoch lived 897. I don't know if these are the right ages, but they live these like really long periods of time, then they die. But what you see in those genealogies is the number gets lower and lower and lower. So people can you can go off about, is it literal? Are they literally that age? Did they live that long? That's impossible. We can get to that another time if you want. I don't know if people would care about that. But what you're seeing actually really clearly is the decay that's happening, because the numbers are going down. And I think that's something that's showing, symbolically what's happening is this decay and this death has entered into the world, and they're not living forever. There's a time limit to our time on this earth. And that all comes because, Satan brings sin into the garden to tempt Eve. He questions in Genesis 3, right? A serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, God has said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden. And the woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. But the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die, for God knows in that day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Mm. And so Satan comes into the garden and he's tempting Eve, and he's saying, like, has God actually said you shouldn't eat from any tree in the garden? She's like, well, no, we can eat from the trees, just not that one. And he's like, come on, you won't surely die. Like, are you serious? What are you talking about? God knows if you eat this, you're going to be like him. Or you're going to be like him. The irony of the whole, situation is Adam and Eve are already living in a way of them being like God. Like in their perfect relationship with him, their union with him, following after what he has said, exercising dominion over the earth. They are being like God, like they were supposed to. They're reflecting his image. But what Satan says is, if you disobey God, that's when you'll be like him, and he doesn't want that.
Yeah, I think it's easy for us to lose sight of like the tragedy of this account. Like we see it, it's like, yeah, Adam and Eve, they ate a fruit, God got mad, this happened, but it actually, it's so much deeper. And we see, so Satan comes in, and the first thing he does is he tries to kind of twist God's word. He's like, did he say, or God said you can't eat of any tree? And it's like, well, no, he said we just can't eat of this one. He didn't say don't eat of any tree. And then she says, then we'll die. And he says, surely you won't die. He just straight up like refutes what God has said. He just lies. He denies it. And the real tragedy is before Eve even takes the, I don't know, mango, whatever it is, this fruit, and eats it, she's already at that point rejected God. She's rejected his command. She's chosen to believe the lie over the truth. The heart of it is about where she's trusting, where her faith is. And that's really what the hardest, where sin is for us. It's about who we're believing, who we're relying on, where we're putting our faith, what we're trusting in. Whenever we do these things, it's like eating a fruit. Physically eating a fruit isn't itself that bad, but by eating this specific fruit, she's rejecting God, rejecting his command, denying his goodness, denying his trueness, and effectively throwing out everything she had, everything she was made for, to break off this communion. And it's actually this really tragic, sad story to read, that I think probably because we learn it as kids, and we learn it in this, like, well, okay, those of us who grew up in church, at least we learned it as kids and learned this like really like censored coloring book version, but it's actually just a really like
on the
sad
felt board.
Yeah, the flannel graph or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh man. That's I feel like that ages us so much.
Yeah, it does. It's like videos now or whatever the young kids are seeing these days. I don't know what they do in the Sunday schools these days. Back in my day, we had flannel graph and projector screens and stuff, but
they're all in VR now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how Sunday school rolls now. I'm sure there's a church out there that does that. There's got to be one. Anyways, basically, yeah, it's an absolute tragedy. And one of the, to continue in that thought, like, Adam and Eve, we often think of it as like they were tricked into it. Like Satan kind of tricked them to eat the fruit. But they weren't tricked into, they willingly rejected God and his law, because what you see happen is what Satan does is he kind of puts a little bit of doubt maybe in their minds, but he says, that's not really going to happen. And Eve says to him, well, we're allowed to eat from trees, but not that one tree. So she's like repeating back the rule to him. So she's not being tricked at all. It's a willful rejection of God. And so they're seduced by sin, maybe by this potential that they'll now know good and evil. They'll be like God. Like Satan says, they're seduced by sin and they have this desire to be like God. And they take the fruit and they eat it. And that's the first sin in the world. And, you know, the world is now falls into sin. That's why we call it the fall. And the amazing thing through all of this is that God permits it to happen. Like we've said many times, like there's nothing that's outside of God's decree. There's nothing outside of his knowledge. And we believe he decrees all things and he's omniscient, but he didn't force their hands in any way. He permitted it to happen. And that was their choice to make. He gave them the law. He said, this is how you live. You're to live. This is how you can be like me and follow me and have this perfect communion with me. And they decide they didn't want it. And it's difficult for us to, there's tons of questions. I think we'll get into it in later episodes. All the effects of that. And is that really fair for all of us to have to deal with the consequences of sin because of this one act and everything? But this is what happened. And it's not like if I was in the garden, I would do any different. I think the exact same thing would happen. Maybe I've done it sooner. Who knows? Yeah. But what we know through it all is that it all works for his glory.
Yeah.
It's all for his glory in some way.
Really our comfort is the promise that we see again and again. I should have had some scriptures on hand, but I think of Ephesians 1 offhand where he talks of being predestined before and God working all things according to his will for his glory is in Ephesians chapter 1. Just go read Ephesians. It's a great book. I don't know, is it weird to have a favorite book of the Bible? It's the one that I find
Everyone says it.
Like easy to read and digest, and it's deep. So anyways, our comfort is the promise that it all works for his glory. And that probably sounds crazy. And yeah, I feel like we need to reiterate that point that we're not saying God caused this, but that he permitted it, that he, knowing all things, allowed it to happen because he can use it, because he can make good out of it. And, on one hand, it reveals his nature, because just in creating, he revealed his power, he revealed his greatness, he revealed his beauty and authority. But in a fallen creation now, he can reveal his mercy and his grace and his patience on us, that he saves. He reveals his justice even on those who are not saved, that they are punished for sin, reveals his just nature and all of it. And the depth of his wisdom is revealed in the cross, which is ultimately the climax and the solution to the story, where you can see that in one moment, he's carrying out justice by punishing sin in himself, in Jesus, at the same time that he is having mercy for us, having grace on us, having way more patience than we deserve. Because, from day one here, eat the fruit should have been the end of humanity. But now, thousands of years later, we're still talking about this story and glorifying God because of it. And that's really our comfort, and we also end up closer. It's a doctrine or a theology I'd love to explore more. I think there's a term for it, but this idea that we actually end up, like, our communion with Christ is on like a higher level as a result of everything, after him becoming man, after us being born again, not under Adam as our covenant head, but with Christ as a covenant head, with us being brought into the family of God, that we actually, coming out of the other side of all this, have a closer communion and a better relationship, and we end up it's for God's glory and our good. Just all around, it's actually better having gone through this, having tasted life without that perfect communion, without him, then his glory shines that much brighter, and it's much better for us.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah, and this is really, when it comes to the fall, this is one of the basic beliefs of the Christian worldview. You have the gospel, which is the center and the foundation of it all, but one of the basic views of the Christian worldview is this idea of the fall and that we are all sinners. And you wrote this in some notes that we have. You didn't come up with this, is what you said?
This was
You've
from
heard it somewhere?
my Worldviews class, and I don't know because the way I took notes as a 19-year-old was not the best. So I don't know if this was my professor coined this or if this is from some source. But basically the idea is that every worldview, and a worldview is just the system by which we understand reality. So that could be, you could have an atheistic worldview, you could have, a Christian worldview, you could have some sort of like, I don't know, Marxist worldview, where you think communism it's answering these questions: what is real, what is good, what is the problem, and what is the solution? And all these different worldviews will say different things. Like I mentioned, Marxism is maybe, like, I don't know that many people personally that have like that worldview, but they go, oh, well, the problem is class inequality. So what's real? We're in this world. A Marxist worldview is typically atheistic. What's real is this world. What's good is equality. The problem is inequality. The solution is socialism and communism. So there's a worldview. That's how they answer the question. But we see this probably more prevalent, as I'd say, like there's a social justice worldview that's saying, what's the problem? Injustice. What's the solution? Our efforts, that we acknowledge it, that we have more representation. And as Christians, we can say, yes, injustice is a problem. Yes, inequality is bad. Or if you have, yes, sickness is bad. All these things are bad, but they're all symptoms of the fall. So what is the problem? The problem really is sin. And the solution isn't more scientific and technological advancement. It isn't more rallies. It isn't, better economic systems and socialist programs. The solution is to be reconciled to God through Jesus Christ and his work on the cross and his life and his mediation.
Yeah. And that's where I think the Christian worldview holds up against all other worldviews. Every other one seems to fall short in my mind when it comes to things. And that's really, we'll bring it full circle here, coming back to the reason for this podcast and the change we've made as well, and the name for sinners and sufferers, is that even when we come into times of suffering and hardship, the answer is we always go back to God. We always go back to the gospel. And it's a way in which, we can look through the lens of the Christian worldview. We can look at the world through the lens of the gospel, and we see brokenness, we acknowledge it, and we know that it's there. We know why it's there, and we know the solution to it as well. And the Christian worldview actually practically holds up as well. And that's something that's huge, where a lot of these other worldviews, you kind of come up against different situations in life and you try to solve it with this. And it's like, we'll take the social justice one, right? What's the problem? There's injustice in the world. What's the solution? We need to make our efforts. But it's never enough, because injustice keeps happening and it keeps happening, and we can't raise enough money. We can't do enough rallies. We can't get enough exposure. And we can't acknowledge it enough. It just never ends. And we're constantly trying to do it. What the Christian worldview says is that's a issue. but there's an underlying issue to it all, which is our sinfulness. If there was no sin, there wouldn't be injustice.
Yeah.
And so what's the solution to all that? It's to look to the one who's fully just and good and will judge rightly and justly and fall under his rule and reign. That's Jesus. That's the gospel. And he came and made it possible for us to do so. So that's what it all comes back to, is what's the solution, or what's our problem? Sins in this world, and we're all sinners. What's the solution? It's Jesus and the gospel.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, there's a lot I'd love to talk about still. I love talking about worldviews. If you feel the same, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment, YouTube, Instagram, send us a message, join the Discord, send us a message. If you message us on Instagram, we're really bad at Instagram, because if we don't follow you, it goes into message requests, and we definitely have accidentally left someone in there for like weeks because we'd forgot to check requests. So maybe bump it, send another one, comment on a post and be like, check your messages. Old
check
men.
your messages, you idiots.
Yeah. But
we'll get better.
Yeah. When we really do, we love to talk about this. We love to have conversations. We don't want to just be here, talking to each other. Like I said, we'll do this without recording because we're friends. So we want to invite you. I guess all of our handles are changing or have changed by the time you're listening to this. So sinnersandsufferers.com. I know that one. We secured that. Is it @sinnerssufferers is the Instagram? Without the word "and", because somebody took that for their record company or something.
And we're not going to pay them $1,000 to get it.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Well, I don't know if that's what they're, whatever.
We'll see.
You've heard those horror stories where people just lock up domains and then a company comes along and they're like, we want the domain. And it's like, give me $5,000 and you can have it.
I saw a TikTok today where a guy named himself JimBeam.com for the whiskey brand or bourbon or whatever it is. And he just makes videos of him drinking it. And he's like, I'm here. If you want to talk Jim Beam, you can buy this handle.
It's genius.
Anyway, thanks for listening or watching. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.